Hello ladies and gentlemen, Panzer here, and today we're taking a look at Angel's Fall first. And one thing I gotta tell you first though is that this is completely voiceover, and I did not record the commentary while playing this. This is sort of my thoughts on the game after the fact, mainly because there's quite a lot to get through. See, Angel's Falls, it's a really hard title to say. Angel's Fall first. It's a very ambitious game. Right off the bat, that's the first thing I want to say. It's ambitious, and hopefully it gets finished. There is a lot that they're trying to do, and it does seem to have a lot of potential. So, as I understand, this originally began as a mod for Homeworld. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it originally began as a mod, and now it's becoming its own standalone game. Now, it's made using Unreal 3, as far as I know. And it does look like an Unreal 3 game. It's not looking particularly fantastic yet, but there are some points in it that look really, really nice. So, what is it? It's a sci-fi, sort of futuristic first-person shooter. Kind of like, if you think along the lines of Battlefield or PlanetSide, you kind of have the right idea. It's a very big-scale kind of shooter type game. So if you're playing as infantry, you can expect to die a lot. But it's got a very interesting way of how it works. So, of course, first things first, it's a shooter. Let's talk about the guns. So there's a wide variety of guns from either of the two factions. Now, the two factions basically are mirror images of each other. They don't seem to have weapons that perform different functions to each other, but they do have weapons that are at least different. So, while a couple of the weapons are shared, the vast majority of them are faction-specific, and they have slightly different performance, but for the most part they are pretty much the counterparts to each other, if that makes sense. So what we're looking at here is some of the infantry combat, and what you're going to see immediately is that it looks fairly familiar. It's not doing anything too different right now. Of course, the UI kind of needs a little bit of work and all of that, but the gunplay itself is a little bit hit and miss, no pun intended. So where it is at right now, we're looking at guns. Some of them have really high recoil and some seem to have no recoil at all. It's a little bit all over the place. And visually anyway, before you get any of the sights and all of that you can modify your weapons, of course. You can put sights and you can put rails and all of that on it. Before you put any of those on, you're stuck with the iron sights, as you would expect. And for some of the weapons, the iron sights are pretty much unusable. Mainly because they don't seem to provide any clear picture for you to aim with. There isn't really any clear aim points at all, so in some cases you'd be better off just hip-firing the damn thing, or waiting to see if you can get a scope for it or something later on. So how does all of that work? Main thing that you need to understand about this game is that it has a certain resource. Of course, as you level up, you get more of those resources to work with. So you have certain points allocated to supply, command, and a blue one which I can't remember the name of. But basically these control what things that you can equip for your player. That includes not just your equipment loadout, but also loadouts for individual vehicles. So of course the higher rank you have, the more flashy stuff you can get. But all of this is based on a point system, so none of this stuff is locked away from you. In fact, if you want to put the biggest gun you possibly can on your APC, you can do that straight off the bat. No issues with that. At the same time, if you want to go for the biggest infantry weapon you possibly can have, that's entirely up to you. So loadouts are actually very flexible. What you can see here is we can actually equip more than one primary weapon, and the only limitation here is of course the point system. We don't need to carry a sidearm if we don't want to. You don't need a pistol, in theory anyway. And in practice actually I don't really find the pistols to be much use in actual combat. So you might even want to swap that out, instead save the points and go for a second primary. Or some grenades, or even upgrades for your suit, or different armor. All of these things are things that you can spend your points on, and it becomes very flexible, so you can customize the soldier to your sort of playstyle very effectively, which I like. On top of that, the vehicles. So we can move on to the vehicles now. The actual vehicle combat is quite good at this current stage. It's not perfect, of course. There are a lot of bugs at this current build, but that's being worked on. The game is being updated fairly frequently. But the actual vehicular combat seems to have a lot of potential. They've got a wide variety of vehicles, from airborne gunships to APCs and main battle tanks, and even little jeeps and all that, and all of these are completely customizable. You can color them differently even, so you can have a specific squad color if you want to do that, and you've got all the colors of the spectrum to choose from. On top of that, you've also got your loadouts for vehicles, so if just the same way that you customize your loadout for your infantry, you can do the same thing for your vehicles. So if I want an APC that has an autocannon on it, I can do that. If I want to swap that out for a rocket launcher, I can do that too. Or if I want to put upgraded sensors on it, again, I can do that as well. And the only limitation, again, are these allocated points that you have. So when it comes to the actual ground combat stuff, it can get quite varied playing against other players. But how the actual vehicle system works is very interesting. So gone are the days of frustration of actually playing in Battlefield, where you're kind of waiting around the spawn area, waiting for the gunship to spawn, and then having somebody spawn right in it and take it away from you as you've been waiting for a long time. That doesn't happen in Angels Fall First. It actually happens throughout the course of the mission. So right at the beginning, you're not going to see a bunch of tanks rushing forward and capping the objectives. That's not going to happen. At the same time, you're not going to see the pilots taking to the skies immediately and locking it down for everybody else. That doesn't happen because the vehicles are actually awarded to individual players as they go along. So as you progress and you capture more objectives, you are awarded the option of spawning into a vehicle. So as you can see here, I'm spawning into a vehicle now, and that actually happens as an award. So it's kind of like kill streak rewards in Call of Duty, but instead of it being just kill streaks and all of that, it's actual team progress. So you can sort of see this escalating warfare thing going on as the objectives move along. Now, most of the maps seem to be based on a sort of tug-of-war kind of rush format, similar to what you see in Battlefield. So as you capture objectives, the next objective moves along. It's not a set sort of capture and hold map all the time. And that's actually kind of interesting, that all the maps sort of progress in stages to a certain extent, and that will of course allow this arms escalation to continue. But there is another facet of this game that made me want to really take a look at it. It's very early stages, the game has a lot of bugs, and frankly it doesn't seem to be the sort of thing that would be ready for a full look at on the channel yet. But why am I doing it now? Well, I'm going to show you. So, the game also features space combat, and while that seems to be something that we could say has been done before, this isn't just another attempt at being a Battlefield game. It's an attempt at having all-encompassing sort of warfare, because the ground combat still takes place in space. How does that work? Well, on some of the maps you have enemy ships, and you can execute boarding actions. In fact, one of the maps takes place in an asteroid belt where there are stations in the actual asteroids. And of course you fly the dropships into them and actually storm the base to try and capture it. But the actual space combat, you have a selection of different ships that you can fly in. You've got the starfighters, you've got the interceptors, you've even got the heavy bombers. And which ship you choose to fly, again, is subject to that sort of same equipment loadout system that we've seen on the vehicles and the infantry. So we can have a very wide variety of ships flying around in space. And I gotta say, it seems to me that the space combat has been worked on a lot more than the ground one so far, because the amount of detail in the space combat is actually really nice. All the ships are beautifully animated, have a lot of detail on them, and the actual space combat is fairly easy to pick up and play. The controls, I would compare them to something like War Thunder. You have the mouse flight, so the mouse controls your aiming and your turns, but then the keyboard kind of controls the other things that the mouse sort of can't do, so you can do your rolls and you can do your thrust control and all of that using the keyboard. Something that seems fairly intuitive, and it was very quick to pick up. Of course, at this stage the game is not really that well optimized, and you're probably going to see that on the video as well. In fact, as I played along, it dropped down to about 25 frames per second on my machine, and I'm running a GTX 970. It's not the latest card, but then again, it runs most other games at a solid 60. So having it drop to 25 is kind of taking away from that. But again, this game is very early on, so optimization is probably going to be last on the list, unfortunately. But right now, the core gameplay seems fairly solid. What we're looking at here is not just a sort of space team deathmatch, but the same sort of objective system that we've seen on the ground combat missions as well. And the fact that it's in space is a little bit more dynamic. Now, what we saw in the ground combat, those dropships that drop off the vehicles and the pods with the soldiers in them, all of that is still available in space, but only in space do you have the option of controlling the dropship as a sort of kill streak reward thing. So players can actually jump into the dropship and join in a boarding party, and at the same time controlling turrets and all of that, so it's very sort of team focused. Now, looking at the online anyway, the online features seem to have... There seems to be a sort of cult community following this already. There are a number of populated servers already, but just in case you happen to live in an unfavorable time zone, there is complete bot support, and at least the bots are somewhat competent. In fact, there have been many times as well where I've lost against the bots simply because they were just better that time round. And you can play private matches with friends. You can create a server with a password, and it's hosted and ready to go. It's very easy to set up, so I thought this was actually quite good, considering that this is made by not a particularly big team, and to be fair, started off as a mod, so normally mods converting to games. There have been a few examples of very good ones, but it's not a sort of part of the market that's particularly big yet, so it's nice to see sort of these really well thought out mods come and become standalone games of their own right. And Angels Fall First is shaping up to be a very interesting title and one with a lot of potential. It's now available on Steam, it's in early access, and updates are fairly frequent. In fact, since I recorded this gameplay, there have been no less than 2 updates already, and they seem to be every other week. They seem to be fixing things and adding content and all of that. So look forward to that. It's definitely shaping up to be a very interesting game. But thank you very much for watching. This has been Panzer taking a look at Angels Fall First. It's now available on Steam Early Access. Go and check it out, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.